Breaking Schadenfreude. Graham Glinner Linehan arrested at Heathrow Airport. Linehan, once a comedy writer, famously renounced his career to devote himself to calling for violence against women and complaining about his lost career, was taken into custody upon arriving in the UK on charges of inciting violence. The aggressive misogynist is currently facing charges for assaulting a young woman in public last year. He shared the social media posts that brought him to the attention of authorities this time with the Daily Mail, including this one. On his personal blog, the angry man who can't understand why physically attacking people is against the law wrote that he was locked in a cell like a criminal just because he committed a crime, and opined that the UK had become, quote, far too accommodating to the demands of violent, entitled, abusive men. Folks might remember Linehan from his infamous unrequited beef against notorious misogynist author Joanne Galbraith, whom he said failed to stand up and defend him, a man, when his decision to torch his career over hatred of women brought social consequences. He said at the time that her failure to stand up for his views made him feel isolated and toxic. As we all know, accommodating the demands of a violent, entitled man is what the UK is known for, according to Linehan. Of this incident, he blogged, quote, I was arrested at an airport like a terrorist. Then, a van was arranged to meet him on the tarmac, so he, quote, didn't have to be perp-walked through the airport like a terrorist. Despite acknowledging his privileged special treatment while proudly taking ownership of his public calls for harassment and violence against innocent people for political reasons, the self-described terrorist still felt the handling of his crimes was unfair to him. Quote, the stress nearly killed me, he blogged, also noting the police took him to the hospital to treat his apparent extreme fragility. He has been released pending court action on the sole bail condition that he refrain from further crimes involving public incitement to violence. Surely a statue will one day be raised to honor his unappreciated, self-inflicted martyrdom. Good news, everyone! Tonight, a giant step in Kenya, a bulwark in Illinois, updates on stories we've been following, and more. Good news starts right now. First, AB Hernandez's mom stood up for her daughter and, by extension, all kids in pushing back on bigotry aimed at children by taking on the school board. Despite being publicly broadcast, only this partial clip was available at time of recording. But it's enough.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Eli Hernandez, and I am the mother of AB Hernandez. I'm just here to remind you, Education Code Section 220, no person shall be subjected to discrimination on the basis of disability, gender, gender identity, gender expression, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation in any program or activity conducted by an educational institution that receives or benefits from state financial assistance. Denying my daughter equal participation or subjecting her to harassment is violation of this law. Mr. Vickers over here, Miss Amanda Vickers, you interviewed with Fox. You actually entertained and welcomed harassment to my child. You are a board member. You have an oath to protect, to support all children, not just the ones that fit your ideas, your beliefs. With that being said, when you allow or tolerate targeted harassment, whether online, in person, or by allowing false narratives to be spread at board meetings, you are only failing morally.
The record indicates there's another 47 seconds of speaking time that has somehow been lost. But we see the general direction of Hernandez's point. This board member actively soliciting hate and abuse against a child that she had been entrusted with the protection of is a betrayal of the entire community and poses a legal liability due to her catastrophic moral failing and short-sighted spitefulness. On a more positive note, Hernandez herself was honored by the Jurupa Valley City Council as well as the state for her achievements over the past year. From KCAL.
A transgender track and field athlete from Jurupa Valley was honored by the City Council today following her controversial state championship win.
Very welcome.
AB Hernandez was recognized by the Jurupa City Council and the State Senate. Her state championship win became a focal point in the ongoing debate about transgender girls in sports, and the Trump administration sued California's Department of Education for allowing trans girls to compete in women's sports. But today, city leaders wanted to focus on Hernandez's achievements.
Hernandez deserves a lot more praise than she gets. Not just for dealing with endless hate from so-called adults with more maturity and grace than they possess, but also for bringing a spotlight to the ongoing struggle for equality in multiple aspects of girls' sports. The same people who tried to keep colored girls out, citing concerns about fairness and safety. The same people who tried to keep gay girls out, citing concerns about fairness and safety, are the same people today picking on this girl, citing concerns about fairness and safety. These are the same people blocking funding for girls' sports, blocking fairness. These are the same people blocking oversight of coaches and investigations into CSA scandals, blocking safety. Hernandez shows not only that minority girls belong, but can excel, and that the overgrown children screaming about how they don't like diversity are exposed not just as bigots, but utter hypocrites. Like a dang champion. Illinois has hooked up the first hotline for LGBT people to find legal assistance with a phone call. From MSN. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker announced a landmark free hotline for LGBTQ+ people in the state, offered in both English and Spanish. The first-of-its-kind service launched last week and will provide legal advice regarding housing, safety, healthcare access, including gender-affirming care, discrimination, identity documents, and more. Pritzker announced the initiative, called Illinois Pride Connect, at an August 21st event with the Chicago Legal Council for Health Justice, which will run the hotline. Quote, "For us to be able to go on offensive and not be on defense is what I love about this state," he said. Building upon the state's transgender and gender-diverse wellness and equity project that we launched at the beginning of 2024, we will be the only state in the entire United States that provides free legal advice to protect the LGBTQ community, he said. Together, we are fighting ignorance with information. We're fighting cruelty with compassion. Courts in Kenya aren't playing when it comes to civil rights. From LGBTQ Nation. Transgender people in Kenya just won a major court victory. A trans woman arrested for impersonation sued, and a judge ordered Parliament to pass a law protecting trans rights. A trans woman's court victory in Kenya could have wide-ranging implications for trans rights in the East African nation after a judge agreed she suffered inhuman and degrading treatment at the hands of government authorities and directed Parliament to enact provisions and recognition in law for trans Kenyans. The plaintiff, Sheyes Chepkoskal, was detained in 2019 and charged with impersonation, despite the fact that she had held official documents, including a birth certificate and passport with female sex markers, while living in another country where she had also competed in women's athletics. Chepkoskal was arrested by Kenyan police while visiting a teaching hospital, Q News reports. He was remanded to a women's facility, strip-searched, and ordered by a court to undergo gender determination, which included a genital examination, hormone testing, blood sampling, and radiological testing. Chepkoskal challenged her detention and the non-consensual medical examinations in court, arguing they were unconstitutional, violated her inherent dignity, and highlighted a legislative gap in the treatment of transgender persons in custody in Kenya. Other countries and sporting bodies take note. Compelling non-consensual examinations of this sort are a violation to dignity, regardless of a person's gender status. Justice R. Nyakundi of the Eldoret High Court agreed that Chepkoskal's right to dignity, privacy, and freedom from inhuman and degrading treatment had been violated, according to a Kenyan intersex transgender and gender nonconforming rights group. She was awarded the equivalent of about $8,000 US. But the judge did not stop there. He went a step further, directing the Kenyan government to initiate legislation in Parliament addressing the rights of transgender Kenyans, either with new protections or by amending current legislation on the rights of intersex people currently moving through Parliament. Quote, "This is the first time a Kenyan court has explicitly ordered the state to create legislation on transgender rights, and the first on the African continent. If implemented, it could address decades of legal invisibility and discrimination faced by transgender persons by establishing clear legal recognition of gender identity, protections against discrimination in employment, housing, healthcare, and education, and access to public services without bias or harassment." Kenya has a fraught history with LGBTQ+ rights, with colonial-era penalties for same-sex behavior still in effect and discriminatory legislation modeled on Uganda's notorious Anti-Homosexuality Act, which allows for the death penalty for homosexuality introduced in Parliament. Same-sex relations remain criminalized with, quote, "carnal knowledge against the order of nature," and gross indecency, punishable by up to 14 years in prison. Transgender people in Kenya face widespread stigma, discrimination, and violence. Current law bars trans Kenyans from legally changing their gender identity from the one assigned at birth. While LGBTQ+ people have found relief in the courts, homophobia pervades Kenyan society and the legislature. In 2023, Kenya's Supreme Court affirmed a decision granting an LGBTQ+ rights group official status and legal recognition as a non-governmental organization. That decision ignited protests in the country's second-largest city, led by clerics and homophobic politicians. While Kenya is far from ideal for many GSM community members, it's always a big plus to see progress, and courts taking action to order legislative bodies to do their actual job is something the whole world could do with more of. Following up on the Wyoming Sorority story, a judge has tossed out a case against the inclusive organization again. Yes, we've heard this story before, but the Bigot Brigade repeated their efforts and hoped for different results. From LGBTQ Nation, judge sides with trans-inclusive sorority. They can admit trans women if they want. A federal judge has sided with a sorority that inducted a transgender sister after several other members sued over the definition of the word woman. Quote, "Having considered the issues presented, again, we find that the majority of the claims must be dismissed on the grounds that this court still may not interfere with the sorority's contractually valid interpretation of its own bylaws," U.S. District Court Judge Alan B. Johnson, a Ronald Reagan appointee, wrote in his ruling. The case started in 2023 when 6 sisters at the University of Wyoming chapter of Kappa Kappa Gamma sued their sorority for inducting a transgender woman. The cis women argued that the sorority breached its contract with them by allowing the trans woman to join, citing the part of the bylaws that refer to members as woman and women, saying that trans women aren't women, somehow, for some reason. The complaint itself was full of invective for their transgender sister, including her height and weight, accusing her of having an angry glare, and misgendering her with he/him pronouns throughout. It only took Judge Johnson a couple of months to throw out their lawsuit, scolding the plaintiffs for including so many personal insults towards the trans woman that they barely had any room left for their legal claims against the defendants. This would have been the end of it, but the cisgender sisters filed another lawsuit this year, citing the new presidential administration's opposition to transgender rights and claiming that the sorority allowing a trans woman to join is, quote, inconsistent with its reliance on the exemptions for single-sex organizations under Title IX. Title IX is the federal law that bans discrimination on the basis of sex in education. The Biden administration interpreted this as a ban on anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination, since it's impossible to discriminate against a sexual orientation or gender identity without taking sex into account. Conservatives, though, argue that this law requires anti-trans discrimination since it defines a group of people based on sex, not gender. But the judge rejected their arguments again, noting that Kappa Kappa Gamma's bylaws don't define the words woman or women to be exclusively referring to cisgender women. He even noted that the sorority, quote, published and distributed multiple texts showing that its interpretation of those words is trans-inclusive, so the plaintiffs can't claim that their contract with the sorority was understood to mean that trans women would be excluded. The trans sister herself graduated from the university earlier this year and said that she's leaving the state. She told Wyoming Public Radio that the publicity that the case attracted led to death threats against her. Quote, every day I woke up feeling like, oh, why does my mouth taste bad? And then realizing like, oh, my heart is racing and my mouth tastes like cotton. Oh, I'm having a panic attack, she said. Like I'm waking up with a panic attack, or some nights just having total insomnia. I think it has to do with just the grace of God helping me get through those finals, and being so like, I have to pass. Like, I can't let these guys win by having me fail academically. I just had to push to succeed, and somehow I managed to get through it. But, she stressed, she doesn't regret joining. Quote, I still think that there's immense value in Greek life, especially at the University of Wyoming. I joined for a reason. There's a sisterhood in sororities that you can't really find anywhere else in 21st century young adult life anymore, she said, and I would absolutely say people should continue if they want that. We reached out to the sister, who, as noted, is no longer even a student at the university, for comment on previous events in this story, and she expressed at that time that she's trying to step out of the spotlight in order to have as normal a life as she can given the state of everything. As a person who has received death threats and follow through on them, I completely understand. As for the sorority, good for them, and good for all of us that they've successfully stood their ground, stood up for their values, and let the haters expose themselves as having more spite than sense. Again. All of that we love to see. Eli, soon to be a Dr. Erlick, is back yet again, this time with an article in the summer issue of Gay and Lesbian Review. Erlick has been busy this year as, besides finishing a doctoral program, expanding modeling horizons, fighting for equal rights in sports, and publishing a book on trans history, among other things, she's also been exploring social and psychological conundrums, like why some famous trans folks fight against their own rights. Here's an excerpt from the article. Making sense of the trans right. Transgender people are typically associated with left-wing politics, but a vocal few have become breakout celebrities among the political right. Buck Angel, one of these new faces on the right-wing gender discourse, has acquired increasing attention for his incendiary advocacy against other trans people. Angel has gained fame as a pornography star and left-wing activist. He's perhaps the last person one would expect to align himself with white supremacists and Trump-supporting Republicans. His vocal calls to ban transgender healthcare, criminalize trans women from using women's rooms, deport undocumented migrants, jail student protesters, and end diversity initiatives may be shocking in the context of his trans identity. Nevertheless, Angel's narrative charts an increasingly common path into far-right circles. I interviewed more than 110 transgender people with far-right views for my forthcoming book, Belonging Through Exclusion: Understanding the Transgender Far Right, which examines the motivations behind their beliefs and what actions could prevent others from joining them. I attempted to avoid writing about celebrities, but Angel stood out. While I worked on the book, Angel released a 15-minute-long video claiming I was a pedophilic child groomer and calling for my arrest because I had suggested that people with access to hormone therapy share medications with those in states where trans healthcare is banned. Quote, "We got to start really pushing back on these people," he told his audience. "They're not healthy for our community. They're not healthy for our youth." There is limited information on the demographics of transgender members of right-wing groups, but there are a few notable trends. The more than 110 subjects I interviewed for Belonging Through Exclusion were overwhelmingly white and older than the average trans population. A majority were trans women, and only 2 were non-binary. They were less religious than the general population and more evenly distributed throughout the US than expected. As for the general political beliefs of the LGBTQ+ community, there is similarly insufficient data. The 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey conducted by the National Center for Transgender Equality found that only 2% of trans people were Republican. By 2022, a large Washington Post Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that the number had risen to 10%, suggesting that Angel is part of an ongoing trend. How did the trans community get here? An atmosphere of dissatisfaction looms over the transgender public as liberal politicians continuously fail to improve their situations. Many trans people feel abandoned by and alienated from mainstream liberal politics. Both UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and center-left Labour Party and US Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris avoided the word transgender on the campaign trail despite ongoing conservative anti-trans rhetoric and legislative attacks. Instead of turning to the left, as most trans people do, those like Angel viewed right-wing groups as the only alternative. That's right, turn into the oppression. Side with the people who are causing the problems you're mad about. Good plan. Very smart. They are part of what political theorists call the multicultural far right, a growing cohort of minoritized people selectively incorporated into a nationalist framework. Right-wing leaders are aware of the West's demographic changes and know they must adapt to survive. Part of their plan is deporting undesirables and making Western nations less hospitable. Another is building a more diverse coalition that incorporates disaffected members of marginalized groups traditionally associated with liberalism. Angel doesn't represent all right-wing trans people, but his ideological transformation is in line with common tendencies in transgender far-right politicization. We may better understand the basic trajectory of the transgender right by following Angel's self-reported experiences of exclusion, identification, and belonging. Angel's political journey took decades. Typically, the first step on this path is a feeling of social exclusion, such as shunning or shaming from those on the left. Most right-wing trans people were not born into a far-right milieu, but were deeply influenced by the harsh policing they experienced in left-wing spaces. As Angel puts it, quote, "People go where their voice is being heard." As countless restorative justice and abolitionist thinkers have argued, ostracizing dissenters from political communities simply pushes them into new spaces where they can continue their harmful behaviors. Angel's contentious relationship with the trans community, particularly trans women, goes back many years. He infamously outed Matrix director Lana Wachowski as transgender in a 2006 Rolling Stone interview after his girlfriend left him for her. In 2013, Angel launched a surgery fundraising website that The Advocate described as a pyramid scheme. The most prominent critics of the website, including author Emi Koyama and journalist Parker Malloy, were trans women. He went on to several other industries, including cannabis and sex oils. His reputation never recovered. In the late 2010s, like many members of the transgender right, Angel began to justify his gender identity using biology. He believes gender dysphoria, the distress over the disparity between one's internal sense of gender and sex, is a rare disease that legitimizes his identity, while other trans people who don't experience dysphoria or don't require medical interventions are not truly transgender. This is called transmedicalism and is generally received negatively within the trans community. The belief in transmedicalism typically excludes non-binary people and trans youth who are not deemed worthy or deserving of health care or self-identification. Angel's tone drastically changed after influential trans woman, video essayist, and cultural critic Natalie Wynn, known by her online handle ContraPoints, briefly featured him as a voice actor in a 2019 video on the philosophy of Western aesthetics. Angel's association with transmedicalism led to immediate, overwhelming public shaming, shunning, and disavowal. This video marked one of Angel's last collaborations with a left-wing creator. Wynn did not defend Angel, and instead denounced his beliefs. Quote, "Some people have taken my association with Angel as evidence that I am secretly a transmedicalist. I want to let you all know, first of all, that I am not a transmedicalist. I have never been a transmedicalist, and I will never be a transmedicalist," said Wynn, mocking the confessional McCarthyite tactics used within the trans community to root out perceived traitors. Angel felt the community unfairly rejected his opinion during the controversy. Quote, "Some people within the non-binary communities react in anger to anything they feel like is a threat," he complained to Newsweek. Quote, "They do not have dialogue. They use scare tactics. They create a mob mentality, in some ways very fascist in thought. They do not like it if you have a different opinion and will try to shut down the conversation." These feelings of exclusion only intensified as he lashed out against the trans women who refused to defend him. Misogyny can be a powerful tool of mobilization. Angel's conflict with trans women appears to be a central motivation for his far right-wing beliefs. Some right-wing ideologues fixate on Jews, some on migrants, others on trans women, among countless other categories. There must be an out-group for the in-group to exist. Most public attacks against trans people are specifically aimed at trans women, who are easy and fashionable targets. Trans activist author Julia Serrano named this phenomenon transmisogyny. In interviews, right-wing trans men and women alike reiterated these ideas, often repeating the conspiracy theory that a secret cabal of trans women controls the transgender movement. Angel adopted trans-misogynist rhetoric to comprehend, justify, and mediate his exclusion from trans spaces. Angel began expressing related concerns about the increasing number of trans people in the early 2020s. This crescendoed when he collaborated with the trans man-led anti-trans group called Gender Dysphoria Alliance Canada on its notorious Trans Men Fight Back statement in 2021. The conspiracy-laden declaration claimed a group of queer trans women are coercing people into trans identity for sexual pleasure and pharmaceutical company profits. Quote, children are being taught a false narrative in the media and in public schools, which is confusing them, in order to protect the egos, fantasies, and capitalist desires of trans women, they wrote. Their account of trans politics, predictably, was not well received, and the 5 white, right-wing trans men quickly took down the statement. In a period of a few years, Angel went from being an influential progressive to one of the world's most vocal right-wing transgender celebrities. His rhetoric supports the political right's divide-and-conquer strategy through the application of respectability politics, misogyny, and exclusion. In return, he has received funding, gained social influence, and even become an outspoken ambassador for the Log Cabin Republicans. These key events provide ample grounding to understand why he began to align himself with right-wing ideals. But this was only the first part of his political transformation. The full article is available at the website glreview.org, and Erlick's new book is expected out early next year. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. TransPositions Weekly is the first and only weekly trans news show in the universe, and we need your support to keep the show going. Contribute at patreon.com/thetranspositions. Spread the word on social media to let people know we're here, and tell us what stories matter to you by joining the community on Discord. Discord, of course, is where the memes live, and our meme of the week was posted by yours truly. And if you find yourself with an unexpectedly vast wellspring of joy at finally being able to actually live in your own life, join us. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, you can tell us about that in the Discord as well. For the TransPositions, I've been Ember Balrad.
Another 75 years of queer and trans American history, picking it up in the 1940s. 1940 ushers in the Lavender Scare, which is the persecution of LGBTQ+ people working for the government. In 1948, scientist Alfred Kinsey publishes the Kinsey Report, citing that 37% of men had taken part in homosexual activities at least once. 1950, the Mattachine Society is founded in LA, which would become one of the primary voices in favor of the burgeoning homophile movement. In 52, Christine Jorgensen transitions, making the paper as the first American to become famous for her sexual reassignment surgery. 55, the first lesbian rights organization, the Daughters of Bilitis, is established by a Filipina woman named Rose Bamberger, her life partner, and 2 other couples. In 59, Cooper Donuts, a 24-hour LGBTQ+ cafe in LA's Skid Row, is the site of a police raid. 5 individuals were held and about to be arrested when they collectively rose up, inspiring an onlooking crowd to fight back against the LAPD and win. In 1961, Illinois becomes the first state to decriminalize sodomy, agreeing that the government shouldn't dictate what happens between consenting adults in private. 1964, the first documented gay rights protest was held in New York City to protest discrimination against homosexuals in the military. 66. Compton's cafeteria riot. Trans women and drag queens fight off police wrongly arresting them in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. Also in 66, sit-ins were staged as a pioneering protest model for how to deal with businesses like Julius Bar, who refused the business of gay customers. Sometime in the mid to late 60s, the term transgender is invented, but won't be popularized until the 90s. 1969, Stonewall. 1970 brought us the Christopher Street Liberation Day Festival on the anniversary of Stonewall. This was preceded by a Gay Pride Week. This event started popularizing the word pride in association with our community. 78, Harvey Milk is elected to San Francisco's Board of Supervisors, fighting for radical change in the short 11 months before his assassination. Also in 78, Gilbert Baker designs the first rainbow flag. 1981, AIDS starts spreading across the world, with the CDC publishing the first report on this odd disease that was initially identified as a bizarre lung infection. 1987 sees the formation of ACT UP, a powerful New York City organization that really helped improve the social, political, and medicinal impacts of the AIDS crisis. In 1993, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was enacted, forcibly closeting same-sex attracted military members. This was directly tied to a rise in hate crimes nationwide. By 1995, AIDS had decimated the community. 10% of gay men from 25 to 44 years old had passed away. 1996, the Republican majority Congress passes DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, clearly defining federal marriage rights as between one man and one woman. 1998, President Clinton issues an executive order prohibiting workplace discrimination for LGBTQ+ federal employees, making the federal government the world's largest employer with a non-discrimination policy, unless you were in the military. 1999 sees the very first Transgender Day of Remembrance. In 2003, America finally saw the federal decriminalization of same-sex relations. 2003. Thank you, Lawrence v. Texas. In 2004, two of the founding members of the Daughters of Bilitis, remember that lesbian newspaper from 50 years ago? Anyway, two of the founding members become the very first same-sex couple to get married in the state of California. 2009, RuPaul's Drag Race premieres on TV. 2011 sees the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, ending 17 years of discrimination. In 2012, the FDA approves Truvada, making PrEP commercially available and substantially cutting down on the transmission of HIV/AIDS. 2013, Edie Windsor sues the U.S. government and wins to be recognized as her late wife's legal spouse for inheritance tax purposes. The Supreme Court does this by striking down the Defense of Marriage Act's one man, one woman clause, laying the groundwork for the legalization of gay marriage federally. 2015, same-sex marriage is legalized when the Supreme Court strikes down marriage bans in Obergefell v. Hodges. The work is far from over. In the last 10 years, LGBTQ+ protections have been steadily rolled back, especially for transgender folks. Remember that people turn toward conservatism in times of economic hardship, which is happening right now. Progress has no finish line. History has no endpoint. Keep marching. I love you. I'll see you soon.